hearty welcome to Grandma's Wealth Wisdom with your hospitable hosts, Brandon and Amanda Neely. This is the only podcast for strategies to grow your wealth simply and sustainably, like Grandma used to. Without further ado, here are your hosts.
Hi, I'm Amanda, and welcome to Grandma's Wealth Wisdom, where we work with you to build wealth Grandma would be proud of.
Greetings. I'm Brandon, and thanks for joining us today. This is a very special episode of the podcast. Not only is it the first of the year or the end of the year, whichever time you're listening to it, but we're also going to be returning I'm going to be returning the favor that Amanda did to me on making me spill the beans about all my story with money, the challenges and all that stuff. And now I get to return the favor and interview her about her story with money.
You know what? I'm an open book. Let's do this.
I'm glad. I might ask some really see how open book you are.
Okay.
We'll try. So I know a lot of this, but our listeners may not. So probably not. So Amanda, what was money like growing up for you?
Yeah, so when I was born, my parents were both together on public assistance, and my mom decided to go back to college in order to provide for the family. And so she was in the midst of doing that. She was in college classes when I was born. She was in her 30s when she did that. And so we weren't super wealthy growing up. My mom, even after college, she got a job working in the college, and it is a rural place in Southern Ohio, so no one made a lot of money there. The cost of living is pretty low, so the wages were pretty low as well. But, I didn't really know any better. That's what I grew up in, so I wasn't expecting to have fancy stuff or anything like that. We just lived and we ate what we ate. We did what we did. And if anything, in some ways, I felt fortunate because I've got 10 older brothers and sisters. So the closest one is 6 years of age, older than me. I'm the youngest, and the others are considerably older. So when they were growing up, there were 4, 6, multiple kids in the house, and there was a lot less to go around. But by the time I was there, and especially by the time I could actually remember something when I was 4 or 5, it was really just my brother and me. And so in some ways I was almost spoiled compared to the other kids because there were fewer kids in the home, and there was more for me to have because I wasn't having to share with all those other kids. So in some ways, I felt really fortunate, even though we still didn't have a lot comparatively. That's kind of my mindset, where I was coming from.
We recently went back to Ohio, and you ran into some of these people that you grew up with, even teachers. What was your thoughts going back and seeing some of these people, seeing your teachers? What came to mind after being an adult? You thinking about this episode, being an adult now, spending most of your adult life in Chicago, but going back, what did you notice?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting going back to where I grew up as an adult now. I've been back for Christmas and stuff like that, but never really seen a lot of the people that I grew up with. And, you mentioned running into one of my high school teachers, and that he is he's retired early, but he's working at a funeral home. That was why we went back, was for a funeral. And that was kind of interesting to see, even though he's a retired teacher, that he still has to have a job, or he wanted to get a job for whatever reason. And he told me one of my other high school teachers is working in the sporting goods section at Walmart. And I know that teacher is considerably older, probably did not retire early, if I were to guess, but that they have to do that in order to make ends meet, or that maybe they wanted to do that. I don't know, he just wanted to keep his hands busy so that he got that job. But I know from, just the outside looking in that that's not what I would have expected my high school teachers to be doing when they're retired.
Yeah, I found that interesting. Also, if I remember correctly, you helped your family, your mom and dad doing budgeting and some other things. Is that?
Yeah, there was one time when I was an early teenager, maybe 13 or 14, that my parents were fighting a lot because my mom had gotten into some credit card debt that my dad either didn't know about or hadn't authorized or something like that. And so they were fighting, and I was like, this fighting has to stop. So I intervened. I made my mom sit down with me at the kitchen table, and we piled up all of her bills, and we calculated everything, and we put a budget together and figured out how she was going to get out of this credit card debt. And then each month I would have her sit down with me again, and we would pay her credit card bills, go through how she had stuck to the budget or not that month, and so on and so forth. You know, my dad was really frugal. He never really spent a lot of money or anything like that. So he didn't really need a budget because he would just not spend more than he had or whatever. But my mom needed that sort of accountability, and I learned a ton doing that with her. And it really showed me.
You were how old at the time?
I was maybe like 15 or 16 when we actually were doing that. Yeah, I wasn't that old though. I was in high school for sure.
So then you were kind of, and leading into this next question, you were starting to do the adulting for your parents in some aspect.
I learned a lot about adulting through that. Although I will confess, when I went to college, I had a bunch of money saved up for my summer job for that year between high school and college. And I blew through everything that I had saved up during that first quarter of college.
Did you use it on beer and
No, I was good. I wasn't drinking. I was going out to dinner though with the people in the dorms. That's what they were doing. I thought that's what I was supposed to be doing. I bought Christmas presents for everybody in my family, or a lot of the people in my family, and didn't really care how much they were. I wanted to buy them presents and that sort of thing. So I got back in January for the second quarter of college, and I had whatever I could earn at that point. I didn't have any savings. So even though I knew this principle of not going into debt, not racking up credit cards, and how important it was to stay away from that, I still blew through my entire savings in one quarter of college, and then basically lived the rest of college just with what I could earn, and still, having to pay tuition, still take out loans to help cover tuition, all that kind of thing. And so when I graduated college, I was basically starting from zero still.
Did you have a lot of cereal? Is that how you made sure it was at zero?
Well, I was living in the dorms for 2 years, and then the third year I worked in the dorms. So I would get room and board included with that job or whatever. So I was eating the dorm food. But my fourth year, I lived in a studio apartment off campus, and I did this kind of thing. There was some kind of pizza place across the street from my apartment that had a $5 large pizza on Monday. And so every Monday would go buy the $5 large pizza, and I would eat it for dinner like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So, at least I had some vegetables there with the tomato sauce on the pizza.
Oh, yeah.
Better than cereal.
I don't know.
If you don't get that reference about cereal, go back to the last episode.
Yeah. So any major things that happened to you that transformed how you thought about or used money, post-college or during college?
So I definitely remember graduating and going to the whatever office and getting the loan paperwork and finding out exactly how much my loans were at the end of college, mind you, not at the beginning, and seeing this is how much I had. Here's what the payments are going to be like. Here's the interest. I can picture myself in that room, getting that paperwork, signing for that. And that was a heavy moment. It kind of took me back to that kitchen table with my mom and the credit card debt that she had. And so I was determined, I'm going to get out of this debt as fast as I can. I'm going to do this. And of course, we get married. You have your student debt. And I'm looking to say not only are we not starting at zero, we're actually starting way below zero. And I was determined to make that happen. And I was really glad my dad taught me a lot about living frugally and that sort of thing. But over the years, even though we were trying to do the best that we could, it never seemed like anything changed. I would, I kept meticulous track in Excel sheets what our debt was over time. And even every quarter or every year as we were going, it never seemed like it was ever getting to be less than what it was. And we were kind of staying even pace, even though we were putting more above and beyond what we were required to toward that debt and all those kinds of things. It was super frustrating. And so I was I was just like, well, I guess this is how it's going to be. I almost was like resigned to, we're just going to be in debt for the rest of our lives, or at least for 30 years. I'm never going to be able to buy a home. Like all those kinds of things were kind of where I got to at that point.
Well, if you know both of us, I went to a technical school and my college debt was a lot more than Amanda's. And Amanda, so I got an associate's, and how Amanda's a lot more financially, or at the time was a lot more financially savvy than I was. She went to an Ivy League school.
It wasn't an Ivy League school.
It was.
No.
Isn't that what
they call it? The Ivy League of the Midwest, but it's not technically an Ivy League school.
It's a better school than mine.
Yeah.
And her debt for a bachelor's was a lot less. And so
I do have to say, I read books when I was in high school about how to pay for college and learned a ton about financial aid and that sort of thing, so that I could potentially go to whatever school I wanted to and not have to worry about that. And I will tell you, tuition at the school I went to was greater than my parents' combined income when I went there. And I got a lot of financial aid that was need-based because of that.
And I didn't even know what financial aid meant.
Grandma always said, eat your vegetables. She loved making home-cooked meals with healthy food and from-scratch desserts. Would you create a diet of fast food or cookie-cutter financial products that made you fat and bloated with fees? Or would you like wholesome, time-honored wealth strategies served with balance and trust? Get started with your healthy money planning by downloading Wholesome Wealth Recipes. Your Moolah cookbook is waiting for you at grandmaswealth.com.
So then we're paying off this debt, trying to overcome this. And you still, along with me, got the idea to open a business, which would take us further into that. How did becoming an entrepreneur impact your story with money on that level?
Yeah. So I remember we had tried to bootstrap and get the money together. I delivered coffee door to door to people. We did all kinds of things to try to get the money to open without having to go into debt. And we had signed a lease. The construction on the space was almost done, and it was go time. We needed to buy the equipment, get the inventory, get open. And I wanted to hold back, and say, well, let's do a big fundraising drive. Let's do something, but we can't just plow ahead forward without the money that we need. And that was me, as kind of conservative, not wanting to go into debt, that sort of thing. And Brandon was like, no, we need the money now, and I'm going to figure out how to get it. And so Brandon found this group that would call or would apply for 10 different credit cards all at once and try to get you approved for a whole bunch of credit cards.
I wouldn't recommend that way,
but that's what you wanted to do.
That's what we did.
And that's what we did.
And it was awesome because we had 0% for 6 months. And that was sounded great.
Right. And so that's how we bought we got over that final threshold, got the equipment, got the inventory, all of that. And I felt not very comfortable with that from the beginning. I wasn't sure that was the best thing to do, but that was kind of our only choice at that point. And, because we couldn't really wait, as much as I wanted to wait, we couldn't. And so that became then, along with our personal debt, because we still had those student loans. And then with the business now being in debt, I was determined we're going to figure out how to get out of this. And we did. Over the next 5 years, we were able to consolidate those credit cards into a low interest loan. Then we were able to chip away at that loan. We found some financial strategies that worked for us personally too. And at our 5-year anniversary, around that time, we were actually able to be free and clear of all debt to ourselves, or to the student loans, as well as in the business. And even some of what we had loaned to the business to get started from our personal finances was paid back to us, which we actually then just took and paid back to the student loans, but whatever. And
that was in big part because of what we learned from our financial advisor and how it really changed our life, changed our business. and
Yeah.
why we're now in this industry.
Yeah. And so I guess the thing I learned the most was having that clear plan, putting in, knowing what you're going to do, and then being tenacious, sticking to that, making it happen, working your butt off. Like, you can make it happen. And now looking back on kind of those 5+ years of, working lots of hours, doing whatever it took to make it happen, I'm glad we did that, because we're in such a better place now. And I talk to people all the time. And I'm always like, do you really want to do that kind of thing where you live like you've never lived before for a few years so that you can live differently later? Or do you want to try to live differently now? And each person has to make their own choice with how you do that. But for us, that really worked well.
So what would you tell an entrepreneur as they're going in to this, your wise and sage wisdom? What would you pass on to that entrepreneur? Not everybody's an entrepreneur here. We're going to get to you others that aren't, but the entrepreneur that has these ideas, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I would definitely say, and I talk to entrepreneurs about this all the time, I would definitely say before you get started, determine which of those two options I was just talking about you want to do. Do you want to do the hustle, or do you want to not have to do the hustle? Do you want to be working 120 hours a week if you have to, or do you want to are you becoming an entrepreneur so that you can have that freedom? And once you've made that decision, then build your business plan, your financial plan around that. So if working like crazy is what you want to do and what gives you life, you're always on the go, you can't rest, then go for it. Do that and really build your plan around that. Whereas if you maybe have a family, or you like hanging out with your friends, or you want time to read or study, or whatever it is, then build a business to give you that freedom, and just make sure your business works for you, not the other way around.
Yeah, that's really good advice. What about lessons you learned about money as an entrepreneur that you'd pass on to non-entrepreneurs? Let's say your grandkids, if you have those in the future.
Yeah. So what I was talking about with getting out of debt and how important that was to me, and something I learned as a teenager and then tried to implement as an adult, I think is really good. But most people will just go after that debt, and then they don't have anything saved. Or maybe they're following other financial gurus' advice and they maybe have 3 to 6 months of income saved, and then they go after their debt. There are other ways to go after debt. We've actually talked about that in a previous episode, but building your net worth is different than paying off debt. And if you're building your net worth, even if you still have a little bit of debt, if it's good debt, not bad debt, we could talk about that. But if you're paying attention to your net worth over time, then that could, for some people, from my experience, that has led me to think a lot differently about money than just being focused on, is my debt going down?
That is really good there. So as we wrap up, what are some of the main lessons you learned about money from your grandma?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me because I only met one of my grandmothers and she passed away when I was 5. But I did learn kind of vicariously through my mom and dad. I heard stories about my grandmother, sewing. Apparently she sewed enough dresses for my mom to not have to wear the same dress twice in a whole month. She really enjoyed doing that. On my dad's side, my grandma, my grandparents were on a farm, and that kind of work ethic that they had to, grow food and sell food and, work the hard labor kind of thing.
And if you didn't know this, Amanda's dad was about the age of my grandmother.
Right. My dad was old enough to be my grandfather. So I learned a lot from him about just how much you can do with how little. We, bought a home when I was 4, turning 5, somewhere in there. And he redid the home and, finished the basement, turned the carport into a garage, redid a bunch of stuff on the outside of the home and on the inside, and basically doubled the value of that home over the 18 years that they lived there or so. Maybe they lived there less time, but doubled the value of the home. And he didn't put that much money into it. And that's just one example of how much he did so much with so little.
So as you think about your future with money, what ways do you want to build more wealth that grandma would be proud of?
Yeah, I want to keep that focus on my net worth and seeing that go up over time. as well as, keeping that focus on multiple generations, teaching what I've learned about money to our kid, or multiple children if we have them, and helping them learn how to also teach their kids, and setting up some of those ways that we can pass on the values that we have about not being in debt, about making an impact on the world, being generous with our money, those kind of things that I think Grandma would want us to be teaching to our kids and grandkids.
And I would say that Amanda's already tried to buy our son, who's 7 months old, a bank for Christmas. And
a piggy bank.
A piggy bank, yes. And I was like, well, maybe we should wait until he's a year and 7 months, so then he at least knows what a bank is. But she's already ready to teach him some of these things.
Absolutely.
So, I want to recap. What I really liked about what Amanda shared is learning the difference between net worth and just being debt free. Like building your net worth is a big thing. And so, anything else you want to jump in on?
No, I think I shared things. I'm sure there's other things that I could have shared that will come up in future episodes. I'm excited for 2019 and all the different topics that we're going to be covering this year. We're going to go back through some of the big things that we talked about in the first 12 episodes and start breaking them down and getting even more detailed on those. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss what we're talking about this year in the podcast.
So until next time, keep building your wealth simply and sustainably for your own future and the future of our grandchildren's generation.
The topics presented in this podcast are for general information only and not for the purposes of providing legal, accounting, or investment advice. On such matters, please consult a professional who knows your specific situation.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.